5 minutes is obviously very short to deal with a topic as vast as the government harvesting every single keystroke from everyone's computer and every single email, every single text message, every single search, and millions and millions of webcam images. But let me try. Edward Snowden was elected by an unprecedented number of Glasgow University students. By electing him as rector, they are making a statement against saturation surveillance by the National Security Agency in the USA, and the information in the public domain which Edward Snowden has placed there, which is massively uncontested. The interpretation of it may be contested, but the information he's put in the public domain of saturation surveillance by the American and British governments of every single citizen is uncontested, and we owe him a huge debt. The aim of this petition is to ask the Scottish Government to offer Edward Snowden asylum in Scotland now, conditional upon a yes vote on September the 18th. Now, whether the people around this table are in favour of a yes vote or no on September the 18th, all can support the notion that a whistleblower like Edward Snowden, to whom we owe a great debt, should be offered political asylum. He's in Russia at the moment. When the Americans cancelled his passport, when he was trying to get to South America, he was locked up for 39 days in the sort of stateless person room at Sheremetyevo Airport, during which time he applied to 21 countries for political asylum. US pressure prevented any of them from acceding to his request. He says he'll take political asylum in any country that respects free communications and freedom of the press. The fact that he's in Russia is now being spun to suggest that there's something untoward about his situation in Russia. And I'm really reminded of the old, I think it was Yiddish story, of the man who murdered both his parents and then asked for clemency from the court on the grounds that he was an orphan. The Americans are now saying because he's banged up in Russia, there's something untoward about his relationship with Russia. But he's striving with might and main to exit Russia and get to some other country which will offer him asylum. I don't have time to go through the whole thing, but in question time I can look at the various different programmes that Edward Snowden has put in the public domain, which shows that you are being surveyed almost every second of your working life through harvesting that data. He's a fugitive. He is trying to get here. We owe him a debt of gratitude. I think the final point I'd like to make in 5 minutes and 300 seconds is that whistleblowers are people who deserve our support. Not just people like Edward Snowden, who reveal something that's of great importance to all of us, and it may be that he's right, that every single child born today will never have any private life. But whistleblowers in the NHS, and only last month, Dr. Raj Mathu was vindicated after many years of being suspended for pointing out that patients were dying unnecessarily because of cuts. Jimmy Savile, as we know, committed horrific offences over many, many years, even decades, while the talk in the BBC canteen was quite often, what the devil is somebody going to do about him? So whistleblowers need support, and if whistleblowers don't get support, those who are potential whistleblowers in revealing illegality, misdemeanour, atrocities and so on, are intimidated. I think many people would suggest there's a democratic deficit in our society. Whistleblowers play a part in mending that particular gap. So I hope I haven't overshot my 5 minutes by too much. Edward Snowden has revealed information to us that we would not otherwise know. It is of significance to every single citizen in Scotland. He acted out of the purest of motives, and an offer of asylum to the man by an independent Scottish government, an offer made today conditional upon an outcome in September, would itself be news and would allow the members of this committee to strike a blow for a private life for all of us.
Thank you very much, Mr Napier, for the depth of your comments and keeping it within time. And perhaps, just from a personal view, you should perhaps congratulate Glasgow University for electing Edward Snowden as rector in absentia. I think the other track record with that was Winnie Mandela, if my memory serves me correct as well. So I think that was an excellent result. Can I ask a couple of questions? I wasn't going to actually ask this, but your comments have triggered a comment in my mind. You were suggesting that the NSA would have been spying on Scottish citizens as well. Is there any evidence in Mr Snowden's information that that was actually the case, that American agencies were spying on Scottish citizens?
He's revealed many programmes, but 5 in all, 5 significant ones. They can spy on any individual anywhere in the world as long as they have an email address. One programme, Tempora, collects all emails, texts, browsing histories, passwords, webcam pictures, and even a Facebook post which you decide to recall and not to send. They are actually harvested. So it's not just what you send that's harvested, it's what you might even think about sending. The German Justice Minister, and the Germans have experience of the Stasi opening a lot of letters, called the GCHQ's harvesting of emails in this country nightmarish. And Edward Snowden has gone on record as saying that the GCHQ, I can't remember the adjective, but is much worse than the NA. I think he used the adjective vicious, is much worse than the National Security Agency in the USA in its approach to harvesting information from citizens who are not even suspected of any wrongdoing.
Perhaps it may be an argument for another day on this one, but I was interested in the comments you made. Just a couple of practical points. I think you've partly answered this. Clearly, the UK currently has a duty and a role over asylum. You were saying that America persuaded a lot of its allies not to allow asylum. I take it there's been an official answer from the UK government that they will not grant asylum to Mr Snowden.
I hope it won't come as a great surprise that of the 21 countries that Edward Snowden applied for asylum to, I have no record that he even thought of the UK, given the way in which Mr Cameron is in bed with Mr Obama. So he didn't even think of applying. He thought it was a lost cause. I think Scotland would be seen as quite different.
I mean, obviously, I won't get pedantic with you, but clearly, if we're in the current arrangements, if the UK granted asylum, that could be within Scotland, since we're still part of the UK. But I was just wanting on the record whether there was a decision by the current UK government on asylum or not.
As far as I know, none.
Okay.
That he would not think that coming to the UK under the present government would be a safe haven.
Standard point. Thank you. And my final point before I bring my colleagues in, you'll be well aware, with your background, that if there was a yes vote, that asylum would remain reserved until March 2016. And thereafter, it would be a competence, if it was a yes vote, for the new Scottish Government to make a decision on asylum or not. Have you had any indication from the current Scottish Government whether there is likely to be favourable to Mr Snowden's application for asylum in the event of a yes vote?
Correspondence was, I think, very unsatisfactory. The reply was, we will deal with each case, with each application on a case-by-case basis in the future. So I don't think it's appropriate to say we'll deal with Edward Snowden on a case-by-case basis. I think we all owe him a favour, and I'm very disappointed in the response of the Scottish Government to the correspondence.
Thank you, Mr Napier. I'll bring my colleagues in. I think Cameron Buchanan wished to get in, and then I'll bring in Chip Brodie.
Good morning, thank you. I just was more in question of the fact is if he gets, it's not really the details of it, if he gets asylum and we are independent, surely the Americans could still put a petition in to extradite him, and that would cost a lot of time and money. He wouldn't get away with it, would he? That would be my worry, or the worry more from the point of view that he would be extradited from Scotland to the United States.
Well, first of all, it has to be a crime. Glenn Greenwald and the team of journalists who've been releasing his information into the public domain have just been awarded the Pulitzer Prize. It's very clear that he's a whistleblower, that no crime has been committed, no foreign state is involved, and if the Americans wish to extradite someone, they have to specify a crime. No crime has been committed. Thank you, Edward Snowden, should be the appropriate response, not a jail sentence.
Excuse me, we've got the example of the Westminster bankers who have been extradited from the UK to America with long jail terms. America doesn't have a very good record of this sort of thing, of whether they committed a crime or not. Under our extradition treaty, they could extradite him sort of spurious grounds, could they not? And I would be worried that this could come up, you know, it would cost us a lot of money, or it would cost us a lot of time and money.
The last, another individual who was elected rector by Glasgow University students in 2004 was an Israeli whistleblower called Mordechai Vanunu. He was lured to Rome and then kidnapped, injected and taken in a speedboat to Israel and suffered 20 years in prison, including 12 in solitary confinement. He's still detained in Israel and not allowed to leave. So yes, there's always a possibility of kidnap, there's always a possibility of extradition, but I think given that Edward Snowden would like to leave Russia, would like to come to a country with a free press and free communications, it would be an honour, I think, for Scotland for him to come here. He's a planetary figure. Most Americans consider him a whistleblower rather than a traitor. I think the discourse that treats him as a criminal is a minority discourse, and I would ask this committee to act on the basis that we owe him a huge debt of gratitude for bringing into the public domain this uncontested information about saturation surveillance of all of you, as well as myself and everyone in the room.
And then John Wilson.
Thank you. Good morning.
Thank you.
Where to start? I think what Mr. Snowden did was brave. I tend to look at somebody also like Michael Moore, whom not the former Scottish Secretary, but the American writer who has indicated many of the actions of the United States. And of course, it's not just the United States. We've had the news this morning of China versus the United States in terms of leakage of information or seeking of information. My problem in this is, you know, how do we change? How would we change this surveillance, which, of course, we know goes on, and as you rightly point out, of each and every one of us, which is wholly unacceptable. I just don't know why offering Mr. Snowden asylum here, how we're going to change that ethos, because it will still go on. I sympathise with his case. You know, I think that he certainly has done a lot of people favours by declaring the information, but I just wonder, it's offering him an asylum here is not going to change anything, is it, in terms of the problem that we currently face in terms of not having open governments or leaders who are unable to open their governments?
One could have said the same thing about any other major world issue in the past, slavery, women not having a vote and so on, that a single action would not solve the problem. No one suggests that it does. But can I go back to the previous question about illegality? The American president's own body, the Civil Liberties Oversight Board, found that these programmes were illegal. So the burden of proof to escape from criminal accusations is not on Edward Snowden, but on those running the programmes. In terms of Edward Snowden being here, I think we need a discussion. We need a conversation. And Snowden went on record a couple of weeks ago as saying that at least the worst thing that he feared hadn't happened, i.e. that his revelations would be ignored, that there has been a worldwide discussion about this issue. It is in the public domain. The higher up the agenda it can be pushed, the better for all of us. There's no magic bullet. There's serious problems of technology here, that every single stroke of your keyboard can be harvested. This was not possible in the past. When I watched spy movies as a kid, the fact that letters were opened between the post office and one's address was seen as ominous and dark. Now every single keyboard can be harvested. So there are fundamental problems. There's no magic bullet, but at the very least we need a declaration of principle. The First Minister has made a declaration of principle that such intrusion is unacceptable and ominous. You've done the same thing, Mr. Brodie. We need more and more of that. We need a tsunami of opposition to this, and maybe a solution is going to open up. But allowing it to be swept under the carpet, and GCHQ has issued a DA notice, some of you will know more about this than I do, to the BBC, advising them very strongly, I think it's like a policeman asking you to pull over, not to run stories on one of these surveillance activities and British involvement in it. So we are already being prevented from accessing information. The BBC is colluding in this. So, of course, are Microsoft, Google, Skype, and Yahoo and so on. They've been very docile, obedient in terms of the NSA. in supplying all this information. So I don't want to, it's a gigantic problem, and there's no single solution. But it would be a declaration of principle. And in politics, I think you understand better than I, symbols are very important. And an offer of asylum to Edward Snowden now would be news. His election as rector of Glasgow University was reported in, I think, about 200 newspapers and TV stations worldwide across the USA. These acts are significant, and I would ask the committee to take that action.
Okay, thank you.
John Wilson.
Can I say I commend Philip Snowden for the act that he carried out in actually releasing the information, and I welcome this petition before the committee. I'm one of these individuals that may have been decried as a conspiracy theorist in relation to what's going on in the world and what various governments are doing. But clearly what Philip Snowden highlighted was not just... Edward Snowden, it's Philip Los Angeles, think of it. The situation in relation to NSA, but also in terms of the involvement of GCHQ and the free exchange of information between the British security forces and the NSA, particularly when many people don't actually realise that the US government runs a listening post in England that's ostensibly run from an RAF base, but is almost predominantly staffed by American personnel linked to GCHQ, listening and monitoring and surveilling potentially every citizen in this country as well as Europe. So there is an issue we have to highlight, as you've said, Mr Napier, about every keystroke, every communication, whether that be by email or verbal communication on the telephone or mobile phone or any exchange, could be being listened into and being monitored by security services. So there is I think it's good to highlight that situation so people are aware that the wrong people are actually being prosecuted and persecuted for the actions that they took. However, I do have some concerns about the validity of the petition at the present moment, because my concern, Convener, is that under the present treaty arrangement that the UK government have signed up to with America, then if Mr Snowden was to come into UK soil, then he would be extradited. I think Cameron Buchanan highlighted that under the existing extradition treaty that exists. And I think there is a wider debate that depending on what happens on the 19th of September this year, about whether or not an independent Scotland would actually honour that treaty agreement with the USA, because I think that we've got to go into that debate before we can commit ourselves to actually giving sanctuary to anyone who seeks that support to come to Scotland, because I think there are discussions that have to take place. I would suggest, Convener, and I respectfully ask Mr Napier to comment, do you think it would not be not appropriate to hold off with this petition until we get the result of the referendum on the 19th of September, so that we could actually then take forward this petition to actually get a reasoned response from the Scottish Government based on what we can deliver, rather than offering false hope to Mr Snowden?
Before I bring Mr Napier in, just for information, I think John Wilson raises a very good point. I had a look at the white paper last night, and page 260, it says, and I've summarised, that an independent Scotland will obtain the current arrangements for extradition. So I think that possibly answers Mr Wilson's point, that's been quite clear in the white paper, and that is obviously the Bible one way, whatever way you view that, in terms of what will happen if Scotland was independent. So I think that point has been answered. But I certainly welcome Mr Napier's view on what would you want this committee to do, because you're the expert on your petition.
First of all, I think it's nice to have an offer. It doesn't mean that you're forced to take it up. And the offer of asylum to Edward Snowden would be the significant part of this. He would obviously have to evaluate the risk of... Sadly, we live in an age where we know about rendition, and people have been snatched and sent off for torture in countries I've worked in. So the record is pretty appalling in terms of people being kidnapped and tortured. So anyone accepting an offer of asylum would have to evaluate the risks. But the offer itself would be a declaration of principle and would be a way of saying to someone that we oppose the harvesting of every keystroke. Can I just add one important thing that I didn't have a chance to say in my opening remarks? I had an opportunity to spend some time that one doesn't often have with a 27-year veteran of the CIA who used to give daily briefings to a man called Ronald Reagan. He sometimes found him awake. But he gave him daily briefings on intelligence. He's a very significant figure in the CIA called Ray McGovern. And when I spoke to Ray McGovern, he said, look, this thing is being sold on the basis of fear, that it's a price you have to pay. It's a price you pay for protection against terrorism, blanket surveillance, saturation coverage. He said it's complete nonsense. The official American government bodies have come up with a figure for the number of terrorist attacks prevented by these saturation surveillance programs. I'm not very good at statistics, but I can remember the number 0. In fact, the biggest prize they could brandish in 2007 was that a Somali taxi driver in America was transferring $8,500 to Somalia. God knows what it was for. It could have been for his family. But that was the trophy that cost billions of pounds in saturation. So an insider from the CIA, from the upper echelons of the CIA, is going public to say the price that we're being asked to pay is a price that gives us no protection whatsoever.
Just before I bring Mr Brodie in, I think it would be useful for the committee to get a strong steer from yourself on next steps. I think Mr Wilson was suggesting, one option is that we could defer consideration to after the referendum for obvious reasons. Obviously, another one is that we write now to the Scottish Government to ask their views, although I think you've already possibly identified correctly what the Scottish Government's view will be. Which of that or the other options would you prefer this committee to follow through?
The worst thing for anyone who's a fugitive and being victimised for doing something noble, whether it be in solitary confinement, in prison or whatever, is the feeling that you're alone. One can suffer greatly with the idea that people out there know what's going on, but the idea of being isolated can be very demoralising. Snowden's election by Glasgow University students was very... he felt great afterwards. It made him feel good, even when exile is being used as a punishment against them. So I would ask the committee to push this petition as vigorously as possible, as quickly as possible, and that the offer be made. The acceptance of the offer would have to follow an evaluation. But the reason I ask for that is that this saturation surveillance is happening today, tomorrow, and millions of our emails and texts are being harvested. So I think it's a very urgent, dangerous situation. It goes well beyond the nightmare scenario. The imagination of George Orwell could not encompass this power by Big Brother. And I think, given the size of the challenge, if I can say the danger, the response needs to be commensurate. And I would ask that we don't get up too close and look too closely at the future extradition arrangements following. The referendum may be yes or no in result, but an offer by a statement of position by this committee would be, well, I was interviewed by the Russian news agency and a couple of other international news agencies today. The deliberations of this committee are going to be significant. So I would ask us to take a position of principle and to push the petition as vigorously and as quickly as possible.
Just to be clear then, that I'm understanding you correctly, would you wish us to write to the Scottish Government and ask the Scottish Government's assessment of this situation? Would that be useful, or would you wish it to... It doesn't sound like you wish it deferred until after the referendum.
I would not wish it to be deferred, Chair. I would wish you to write to the Scottish Government and ask for a clear answer. I would wish you to take any steps within your power. I don't know to what extent you can stimulate any debate inside other sections of the government, but I would ask you to take every step that you possibly can.
Thank you. Mr Brodie?
Yeah, just briefly, when you alluded to Scottish Futures, I'm so glad that you've read it, Convener. I would hope that...
Were you any doubts, Mr Brodie?
I'll ask you questions later. In the issue of extradition, there would have to be, I would hope, going forward, evidence of criminality. And I think that is quite important going forward in terms of... we had a situation with the hacker's name, it escapes me, that ran for about 5 years, 4 years, 5 years. The young Scots Scots guy. So, just for clarity, I think when we talk about things like this, we need to be very clear as to the principles that would be applied in terms of looking at international agreements.
John Wilson.
Convener, just one question to Mr Napier. Do you think it would be appropriate for this committee to offer false hope to Mr Snowden regarding political asylum if on the 19th of September and beyond the 19th of September, irrespective of the outcome of that referendum, the extradition treaty with the United States is not revoked?
There are moments, there are huge issues at different periods in history, and this one is the big issue today. I don't think that Mr Snowden is naive. He has taken this step. He's given up, as he said, living in paradise in very secure conditions, high salary, great life, and he's taken a step, and looking back on it, he is pleased that he did so, despite the dangers, despite, according to very reputable US media sources, elements inside the American intelligence community openly discussing the option of killing him. And this has been discussed in the media as well. He thinks he took the right step. He will not think that the offer of asylum by a committee or by a group of parliamentarians means that it's a done deal and that he should buy a ticket from Moscow to Prestwick or Glasgow. But it will be a morale booster. It will be a signal, by the way, more importantly, to people in Scotland that there are people inside the Parliament who view the saturation surveillance gathering very, very seriously indeed, because not much is coming out from the political domain that this issue is treated with the gravity that it undoubtedly deserves. So I think this would be newsworthy, and it would be newsworthy as a declaration of principle. And if I may say, and I exclude people inside this room, politicians currently have a very poor reputation indeed. They are very low in public esteem, and this is a young Parliament and hopefully will escape the opprobrium of their partners in Westminster, where the majority had to return money wrongly obtained in the last Parliament. But I think this is an opportunity for parliamentarians to change that, to win back public esteem by being seen to take a stand on an issue of principle, and the details can be ironed out later.
I would love to continue longer with this debate, as I'm sure you've identified, but unfortunately we have other petitioners. But if you could just remain for a second, we're now finished the questions, and it's for the committee to make the decision, as always. So we're at the summation point, so we have to decide what we do with the petition, as you'll be aware. You've helpfully given some advice to us on next steps, but again, this is for committee members to look at next steps. I mean, my own view is I think there is merit in asking the Scottish Government its view. You've probably identified what you think the view is, but I think, as always, we normally write to the Scottish Government because it does deal with the Scottish Government function. But again, I'd like my colleagues just to see their individual views on this matter. Chip Brodie?
Difficult, Convener. As I said earlier, I sympathise with what Mr Snowden did, was forced to do. I take the point that John Wilson made about offering false hope, and while a letter to the government might produce the same answer that Mr Napier has had from the Scottish Government, I just wonder if it's wise to do anything. This is not what's the phrase, kicking it into the long grass, that it's wise to do anything until we know the situation after September the 18th. I don't like unnecessarily prolonging decision-making, but I'm conscious of Mr Snowden's position. But I'll go along with the General Committee.
John Wilson?
Convener, I think, as I've already outlined, I've got general sympathy with the petition that's before us, and if it was in our gift, and I mean the gift to the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament, I would like to see us being able to give political asylum to Mr Snowden. However, given that we don't have, that it's not in the gift of the Scottish Parliament or the Scottish Government at the present moment, and I do feel that it will be subject to negotiation, and the conveners quite rightly pointed to the white paper, which clearly outlines, and it was paragraph 260, convener, page 260, that there would be the intention of a potential future Scottish Government to honour that extradition treaty, that I think I would be minded to actually delay further consideration of this petition until after September the 18th, to allow us then to take forward a debate within this Parliament, within this committee, about the wider issues that this political asylum petition seeks in relation to not only Mr Snowden's life and liberty, but also the issue about extradition treaties with a country that seems to flout international law. And that would be my opinion.
Thank you, Mr Wilson. Anna Taggart.
It's clear that it's not within our gift, and I think the Scottish Government have clearly indicated on page 260 what their intentions are if there was a yes vote on September the 18th. I'm not really sure of the merits of, Mr Napier has already written to the Scottish Government. They have already indicated their response, of which obviously isn't of Mr Napier's satisfaction. However, I'm not sure if we as a committee would receive any other response differently.
Okay, thank you for that. Angus MacDonald.
Thanks, Convener. Firstly, can I say I certainly have some sympathy with the petitioner, and he's certainly spoken passionately about his case today. As has been mentioned by yourself, Convener, we're limited to the action that we can take. Even with a successful yes vote, Scotland won't be independent until March 2016. So it would be a decision to be taken by the new Scottish Government of whatever colour that might be. And I note the request by Mr Napier to move speedily with the petition, but there are issues with regard to Mr Snowden's temporary asylum. I believe Russia has only granted temporary asylum for a year, so perhaps, you know, the 21 other countries that he's applied to for political asylum, perhaps there could be some intervention from one of them before his temporary asylum is up. So I would tend to concur with the general feeling of the committee that given that there are these two issues, the temporary asylum that he currently has in Russia and waiting to see the result of the referendum in September, we should defer further action until after the referendum.
From Mr Torrance and then Cameron Buchanan.
Defer to after the referendum.
Cameron Buchanan.
Absolutely. I think we should deter to the after referendum. I think it would be premature to deal with it just now. I don't think it's anything to do with Edward Snowden in this case. I just think it's not really within our competence, and I don't think there's any point in writing to the Scottish Government because it won't matter.
Well, thank you, colleagues. Mr Napier, obviously you've heard, I think all of us are very interested in your petition. I think the majority opinion is clear that we need to defer. That doesn't mean that the petition is concluded. We would obviously wish to keep you carefully up to date after the referendum and discuss this issue further, obviously depending on the result on September the 18th. Could I thank you so much for your contributions. I think you've made an excellent contribution both in your 5-minute and the way you've answered the questions. I think you're really an example to other petitioners of how to deal with petitions in this Parliament. So can I congratulate you on your performance today, and I suspend for 2 minutes to allow our witnesses to change round. Thank you.